morning to you all, our honored guests, eminent scholars, and dear colleagues and friends. As director of the Alexandria Center for Holistic Studies, it is with great pleasure and honor that I welcome you all to the Alexandria Library for this exceptional event. My interest and involvement in this event is multiple, actually, so I'm wearing different hats here. First, as an archaeologist, with a particular interest in the archaeology of Alexandria. So being among such an eminent group of scholars is truly a pleasure and an honor. Secondly, as a proud member of the Alexandria Archaeological Society, which is celebrating its 130th anniversary. I've been a member of the society for the past 30 years, so I missed the first 100 years, but I'm a member for 30 years. During this period, I've witnessed the great achievements and contributions of the society to the preservation and awareness of the cultural heritage of Alexandria. Finally, as a student of Professor Mustapha al-Abadi, an exceptional person to whom this event is dedicated. I have known Professor al-Abadi since the early 90s, since 1991, actually. Since then, he has been a great support to me throughout my career, both on professional and personal levels. In fact, I still have some of his letters that he wrote me during my scholarship in the UK, encouraging me not just to study hard, but to visit theaters and to attend concerts and to go to parks and museums. And he always often said that it's not just about education. It's about the entire experience that they should embrace. So I always be in debt to Professor al-Abadi. Our dear guests, over the 3 days of the conference, we will enjoy numerous papers and discussions concerning different aspects of exploration, preservation, and presentation of Alexandria's cultural heritage, which I'm sure that you'll all enjoy. I mean, having a look at the program, you will realize the array of topics and subjects that will be covered during the event, which is really exceptional. Without further ado, I wish to call to the podium my dear colleague and friend and professor, Professor Ashraf Farag, to give a welcome word on behalf of Professor Ahmed Zaid, Director of the Biblioteca Alexandrina. Thank you.
The engineer Hada Al-Miqati, the general coordinator of the BA, Dr. Muhammad Sulaiman, the head of the culture outreach sector at the BA, my colleague, Professor Mona Haggag, president of the Archaeological Society of Alexandria, the ASA, my colleague, Professor Ahmad Khalil, director of the Alexandria Center for Hellenistic Studies, ACHS, the guest of honor, Professor Amr al-Abadi, the honored audience, ladies and gentlemen, good morning, welcome thrice to the Biblioteca Alexandrina. It is my pleasure to talk to you on behalf of Professor Ahmed Zaid, director of the BA, who apologizes for not being able to attend today due to unforeseen circumstances requiring his presence in Cairo. I convey his greetings and gratitude for you all. Dr. Zaid has commissioned me to speak on behalf of him at the opening session of this distinguished international conference held celebration of the 130th anniversary of the ASA and deduction to the memory of Professor Mustapha Al-Abadi, the big name and the brilliant scientist who raised the slogan of reviving the ancient library of Alexandria. Mustapha Al-Abadi was a historian, archaeologist, and thinker of a unique caliber. He was also a founder of a distinguished scientific school in Greco-Roman studies. However, he was an owner of a distinguished research approach, a creative approach in scientific research. He was, and still is truly, an Egyptian legend whose likes are rarely found in time. Ladies and gentlemen, we are meeting today in this conference whose sessions are dealing with Alexandria and Hellenism in northern Egypt, which was the result of the Egyptian Hellenic or Hellenic Egyptian cooperation since ancient times. Such cooperation emerged as a model for civilizations dialogue, mingling cultures, knowledge, and science of East and West in one mixture. On the land of ancient Alexandria in the 3rd century BC, the dream of Alexander the Great was fulfilled. And from Alexandria, he began his civilizational project to create a cosmopolitan city, a global polis, or independent polis in Greek sense. It was a tree that brought forth clusters of knowledge in northern Egypt. And one of the most catches of this tree was the ancient library of Alexandria, which Al-Abadi revived and brought it back to life. As a result, ancient Alexandria became the cultural, scientific capital of the whole world without rival, without partner. Anyhow, at the end of my brief talk, I wish you a successful, fruitful conference, as well as a pleasant stay in Alexandria. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Ashraf. Thank you very much for this word. Well, the driving force behind this event has been Professor Mona Haggag, as you probably know. The idea behind this event started several months ago, and it has been discussed, and all the details went through Professor Mona. And again, I believe she's wearing different hats now, as the president of the Archaeological Society of Alexandria and a student of Professor Mustapha Al-Abadi and the director of the renovation of the project of Shotby's tomb, as you're going to see. In fact, the Archaeological Society at Alexandria, from my point of view, have seen a revolution to an extent during the period of Dr. Muna's presidency. Professor Abadi was president of the society, and during that period, a lot of the foundation concept behind the society has been laid. The activities of the society extended beyond the conventional, traditional lecture into actually awareness and involving the public and developing a message about ancient Alexandria to the people in general. And this also have taken a further step under the presidency of Professor Mona Haggag. So again, personally, I'd like to thank her for this, for organizing this event, and for being after every single detail to completion and to perfection. So please, Dr. Mona.
Thank you. Leaders and members of the Biblioteca Alexandrina crew, members and friends of the Archaeological Society of Alexandria, esteemed scholars and researchers of the Centre d'études alexandrines, fellow Egyptian archaeologists, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. At the beginning of my talk, let me ask a question. What is an anniversary celebration for? Is it a moment to look back at the journey of our society and its achievements? Is it a moment to announce any new achievements, or a moment to look ahead on the tasks which lie on our doorsteps? Is it an occasion to pay tribute to the founding members and other leaders of the society, having been the reason behind our presence here today? Or is it a pause to look at the principles which those leaders set for work in the society and asking ourselves whether we have been true and faithful to these principles or not? In my modest point of view, an anniversary is a combination of all these notions. If it comes, or when it comes to the 130th anniversary of the Archaeological Society of Alexandria, then we are dealing with a long history, deep-rooted history in the civil work. All these identifications become more focused and emphasized. It is a history of more than a century and a quarter of a pioneering institution in the field of tangible heritage preservation. At a time when Egypt had no legislations to protect its monuments, an act of transporting monuments abroad was then not looked at as illegal, but things became different with the founding of the Archaeological Society. When the society emerged to the public, spreading knowledge and awareness, the local community of both Egyptians and non-Egyptians began to appreciate monuments and take their preservation into consideration. It represented a model for other societies to follow in contributing positively to the local community. The publications of the society were the earliest scholarly investigations in the fields of topography, urbanism, architecture, and artistic production of ancient Alexandria and Egypt. The Bulletin de la Société d'Archéologie d'Alexandrie, BSAA, opened the door for a new branch in archaeology dealing with all aspects of ancient Alexandria, which is now called Alexandrian Studies. The regularity of the Society's cultural program, including lectures, seminars, and excursions, as well as workshops and conferences, widens the scope of beneficiaries within the local and international communities. The multiple fields of activities of the Society ranging from scientific research, fieldwork, defending and salvaging monuments, dissemination of knowledge, education and training programs, and promoting public awareness, stand well for the positive impact of the society among the local community. This is met with international appreciation for the society in general and for its scientific activities in particular. When it comes to the achievements of our society, I'll speak only about the 3 major projects that were achieved over the last 10 years. Number 1 is the revival of the Greco-Roman Museum of Alexandria. Number 2 is the consolidation and renovation of the society premises. Number 3 is the restoration, conservation, and upgrading of the Hellenistic cemetery of Shahdt. As for the Greco-Roman Museum, it is already well known to, I think, everyone in this hall that in September 2005, the issue was decreed to close the museum for refurbishing and for consolidating its building and vice versa. The project for the development at that time began to be planned. A committee headed by Mustapha al-Abadi was assigned to create the vision and display scenario of the new museum to become. In 2011, the society launched for a campaign for the annexation of the plot of land which belonged to the Alexandria Governorate, to the museum. The idea was that enlarging the area of the museum is a step forward towards transferring it into a new scientific, cultural, and research establishment that can be a beacon of enlightenment in Egypt and the entire region. In April 2015, the campaign was met with favorable response, and a memorandum of understanding was signed between the Ministry of Antiquities and the Alexandria Governorate, but the Governorate plot of land is a dilemma that has not yet been solved. But we shall never give up. The history of our society teaches us that no great task has ever succeeded without great sacrifices on the part of its promoters. The society was asked after this to take over the new vision and scenario. Together with national and international experts, the task was achieved and presented to the ministry. The society provided a new display scenario for the museum's collection with a vision of changing the concept from a museum to a museum. In 2016, the Egyptian government has allocated a considerable sum of money for the revival of the Greco-Roman Museum. The idea of the annexation of the governorate land ended up by 11-meter long at the southern side of the museum to be used for parking. Well, it's one good step. 11 meters are not so bad, let's say. During all works of the museum project, the society worked and still working hand in hand with the ministry towards the accomplishment of the revival project. As you will see the day after tomorrow, the Greco-Roman Museum of Alexandria is currently receiving the final touches to come back to life with a new setting, monuments, and a thematic display scenario. It was Dr. Mustapha al-Abadi's idea to turn into thematic display scenario, which we stick to it and continued accordingly. The second major project for the society was the restoration, consolidation, and renovation of the society's old building to render it fit to carry on our cultural message. The society tried for a long time to get funds for this endeavor. After the death of Mustapha al-Abadi, his son Amr al-Abadi thought of the project which his father dreamt of and decided to cover the costs of the entire project. The project began in June 2018 and finished up in December 19. The official opening was on 19 December 2019 under the auspices of the Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities together with the Alexandria government. The Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities was very generous to complement the project with the renovation of the outer facade of the building, which was perfectly executed by the Ministry of Antiquities to be harmonized with the east wall of the museum. I wanted to bring a photo, but I found them putting papers of newspapers on the windows and ugly looking. So I prefer to put it like that, and you will see it the day after tomorrow with the newspaper papers on the windows. The completion of this project has truly salvaged the building, which was once home for the activities of Ambrosius Rallis, Prince Omar Tosun, Daninos Pasha, Tassos Neroutsos, George Gosios, Judge Jasper Printon. The three pioneering Italians, Giuseppe Botti, Evaristo Breccia, and Achille Adriani, Dawood Abdu Dawood, and Mustapha al-Abadi, to name only a few of the illustrious names whose works were closely connected with the society. The third project we are going to speak about, maybe this day, not these minutes only, is the restoration, conservation, and upgrading of the Hellenistic cemetery of Shadbi, the project which tomorrow you will share us in its official form opening. One of the fields of activities in our ancestors' statutes is defending and salvaging archaeological sites that are threatened by nature or actions of violation. However, the last achievement in this respect was, for the society, was in 1937-1938, when the society set in motion a project for the restoration of the then crumbling temple of Taposiris Magna and the tower, which was built in imitation of the ancient lighthouse of Alexandria. The fact that this important Ptolemaic temple and tower still dominates the ridge above the Marsa Matruh road is due to the achievement of the society. Since that time, the society hasn't been in the field at all. So, it is thanks and due to the sincere efforts of my colleague and friend, Kyriakos Savopoulos, who is with us today, that he created the link between the society and the A.G. Lefentis Foundation of Cyprus. And because of this, Professor Charalambos Bakirtses paid a visit to the society. And we discussed many things. He is the former director of Lefentis Foundation. During this meeting, it was agreed that it is time for the society to come back to the field, and it is at the same time for Lefentis to contribute to the antiquities of Alexandria, which are in dire need to be protected and upgraded. a long-term project for interfering in the funerary sites of Alexandria, one by one, under the title of the Alexandrian Necropolis project, was agreed on. The Hellenistic cemetery of Shadbi was the first site to begin with. Excuse me. The Shadbi project was launched in January 2020. A team from the society was formed, directed by the speaker, co-directed by Professor Hussein Abdulaziz, and co-directed by Dr. Kyriakos Savopoulos, and experts who all belong to the society in a way or another. In addition to a team from Cyprus Institute, headed by Professor Nicholas Bakirtsis, for the digital documentation, and a team from Athens University, headed by Professor Nicholas Dimakis as head of the research for the project. We began in the field work in August 2020. Tomorrow evening, you will see what happened there and participate in the official opening, so I'm not going to say anything more about this project here. Now, let's go to the concept that an anniversary is an occasion to pay tribute to the society's leader who were the reason behind our presence today. In the last 10 years, the society has lost a number of its important figures. Few years after the death of the society's president and supporter, Mustapha Al-Abadi, in February 2017, Professor Mohammed Rafiq, the humanist surgeon and the vice president of the society, passed away on March 2021. Professor Farouk Abaza, in June 2021, also vice president of the society during the time of presidency of Mustapha Al-Abadi. Dr. Nabil Swalem, February 2020, the pyramids expert and discoverer and an intimate member of the society and contributor to it. And after we began working in Shadbi, one of the influential board members of the society and member in the committee of administration for the society, for the project, passed away as well, Dr. Ala El-Ingibawi. These are, of course, losses. But the losses of the society happened in a period of time that witnessed a number of eminent archaeologists worldwide also leaving our world. They were all connected to the society and well-known figures in its cultural seasons. Nicola Buonacasa, November 2015. Christopher Haas, March 2016. Susan Venett, June 2017. Judith Mackenzie, May 2019. And Mitslav Rodievich, May 2019. Let's come to the idea of this conference. The idea of this conference, in fact, came after our great scholar and friend Roger Bagnall paid a visit to Shadbi Cemetery while we were working there. And discussing and speaking to Roger about my concerns at that very moment, which were the idea that it's been about 5 years since Mustapha Al-Abadi passed away, and we did not introduce any publication to his memory. 2, after the completion of Shadbi project, and at that time we were about to finish up, we need to present our work in Shadbi to the community of specialists and create some sort of brainstorming about the results that came out of the project. Number 3 is how to celebrate the society's 130th anniversary. Talking and discussing with Roger Bagnall and I resolved to combine all three concerns in one. To celebrate the anniversary through an international conference following our society's long tradition, as Shadbi expresses well the Macedonian Hellenic presence in Egypt during the earliest phase of the founding of the country's capital, Alexandria, why not to explore what was the impact of Alexandria's Hellenism in a contextualized approach? And to use Bagnall's words, that means thinking of the whole north coast and at least part of the delta on the one hand, so that Alexandria does not seem like an isolated island of Greek settlement in an alien world. And on the other hand, all sorts of cultural phenomena that are associated with Alexandria's Hellenism are not entirely new to this area, whether it is Mediterranean trade, large-scale wine production and consumption, or artistic influences. Then we agreed about that. With the accomplishment of the ASA massive project for the Hellenistic cemetery of Shadbi, this conference is, on the one hand, the best platform that the results of Shadbi project can be discussed. On the other hand, the entire event forms the best present that can be dedicated to the soul of Mustapha al-Abadi. What else can appeal to Mustapha al-Abadi than something like this? Confirming that the ASA keeps his principles and will never lose his footsteps. I will take a minute or two in acknowledgement, which is very dear to myself. First, the Centre d'études alexandrines, headed by Thomas Fauché, and with the collaboration in this part of concern with Mr. Magid Nassim. Actually, I would like to express deep thanks to Thomas, and he gave me truly the feeling that in spite of the change in directorship, after the great Jean-Yves Empereur and the very dear friend Marie-Dominique Nenna, nothing has been changed, and the relationship between the Centre and the society is still going as it used to be. The Biblioteca Alexandrina, Alexandria Center for Hellenistic Studies, headed by Ahmed Khalil. Ahmed Khalil himself is a very sincere, dear, and special person to me, and very connected morally with Abadi's principles. Without any reservation, Ahmed has put all possible resources and workforce to make this event a success. At the same time, his assistant and researcher in the center, Mark Kyriakos, the beautiful young, has canceled his vacations and weekends to continue working on every minute detail and respond to my endless demands. Thank you, Kyriakos. Thank you, Ahmed. And the Alexandria Center for Hellenistic Studies staff, Aya Samir, Nada Mahdi, Shayma El-Far, Amir Salah, Hassan Agami, and special thanks and appreciation to Reem Nouman, the graphic designer, who is really a curator. She's an artist. As for the team of the Archaeological Society of Alexandria, usually I don't like to thank people who are connected to the institution itself. We don't thank ourselves, actually, but I feel obliged to do this for those figures which I'm going to speak of, because they are really extraordinary people. I cannot express how I'm grateful to them, not only for the non-stop work with full devotion, but also not only for the conference, but for the project, for the library of the Archaeological Society, for the work in the Archaeological Society, for everything that happens, and they never complain. But also they give me, myself, moral support when it's really needed to me. Thank you, Minnatullah Hassan. Thank you deeply from my heart. Thank you, Basma Khalil. Thank you very much, Dina Ata. Thank you, Ramzi Wahba. And thank you, Hassan El-Malhi. Very dear persons to me, and I think they love you all. And you will see when you go to the society 2 different kinds of exhibitions. One for 19th century remains, which is organized by Ziyad Morsi, and one about textiles, ancient textiles, and you will find replicas of real pieces of textile made by Ibrahim El-Kholi, whom we are going to talk about many, many times. With all your endless support and cooperation, together we can work to attain our common vision, mission, and goal. Thank you very much for sharing this momentous moment with us.
Well, it's quite emotional, actually. As we have seen and heard from Professor Mona Haggag, the society has done much more than just organizing events, which has been happening for decades now anyway. But for the first time for many years since Tabuzir's renovation, the Tower of Tabuzir's Magna's renovation, there is actually physical contribution on the ground. I mean, things that we can go and visit and see that has been done by the society's team. I mean, next time we go by the Greek-Roman Museum or we visit Shotby, we should all remember that this was, done due to contribution of the society and colleagues and associated organizations and institutions like the Sir Alex and the Biblioteca and others. And again, this is all the legacy of Professor Abadi. Having said so, I'd like to call to the podium Dr. Amr Al-Abadi, our guest of honor, and it is really a true pleasure to have you here. Dr. Amr.
Good morning, and thank you very much for inviting me. I have to say that when Mona asked me to come and talk, it was not easy, talking about my father and talking in front of such a distinguished audience of historians, archaeologists. I'm a computer scientist. I'm not used to talking extemporaneously like this about emotional things. And so I hope you'll enjoy what I have to say. I'll try to reflect on my father and how he had a significant effect on us all. So actually, the first picture is the same location that was shown earlier, just west of here in Alexandria with my father. And there's the picture of Herodotus that was very important in our lives. My father used to have this in front of his desk, next to his desk, and we kind of felt history was in our house, parcel and integral to our whole being. So I'll just start by just giving you some background about our family. It's a very Alexandrian family. My grandmother was from Alexandria. My grandfather was from Alexandria. They actually grew up just west of here in the piece of land that connects the island of Faros with the old Rakutis, this part of the city. My grandfather was the founding dean of the College of Arts in Alexandria University in 1942, which was really in the middle of Second World War. Tahsin, who's an eminent scholar, writer, probably the most eminent in the 20th century Egyptian literature. He was the founding director. And my father used to like to quote Taha Hussein saying that during the opening in 42, he spoke to the king and said, "You are opening a university for science, education, and thought, and there are wars just happening 100 kilometers west of here. El Alamein was just around the same time. So this is the environment in which the university was created, and our family was very involved." My father was not born in Alexandria, he was born in Cairo because there was no university in Alexandria at the time. So his father had to go to Cairo to study in Cairo. And then and he was born in Rhoda, which is the island in the middle of Cairo in the river. And it was only in 42, when the university was founded, that the whole family came to Alexandria and reconnected with the rest of the family, Al-Abadis and the others. Beach was very important for us. This is a picture of my grandmother with uncles and aunts in the 50s, probably 60s maybe. My father isn't in the picture, but the beach was very important for us. We used to go every day, and my father would take us every day in the summer, and we would just enjoy it. My father joined the Faculty of Arts in Alexandria in 47, and at the time, I copy a lot of these things from his memoirs. There were lots of quite eminent scholars who were visiting Alexandria, teaching here, and he interacted with them, took classes from them. He was a TA, or a teaching assistant, as we say, Mu'id al-Arabi, in Greco-Roman with Alan Weiss. So there was a lot of cultural integration that was happening at the time in the late 40s and early 50s. He was due to go to Cambridge to get his PhD, but then the revolution happened and 52 intervened, so it was only in 53 that he went to Cambridge. He was admitted to King's College, but he knew Hugo Jones, who became his advisor, and he suggested and recommended that he move to Jesus. So my father ended up being a member of Jesus College. One of the stories he used to tell us was that he was into athletics, water, and as you know, Cambridge is not on the water, so he had to do with a river. And one of the stories was that the river he couldn't believe it was a river because he was used to the Nile, which was much bigger than the Cam in Cambridge. He picked up rowing, but then his academic advisor, Shackleton Bailey, advised him, you cannot do both. You can't do classics and rowing. So he ended up abandoning rowing. He didn't abandon swimming. Life in Cambridge seems to have been very pleasant with my mother and the Cam. And then they came back to Alexandria. And I was born in Cambridge, but I came here when I was 10 months old, so I don't have any recollections. And as a kid, my colleagues would ask, what does your father do? And I would just say, he's a traveler. We travel all the time. That's what we do. So I'll go in the next few slides on some of the trips we went together or not together. Turns out that he met my mother on a Luxor trip as a student in Alexandria in the 40s, so before they actually went to England again. They went independently. My mother actually went to England before my father. She went as to do a PhD in English, and she went in 51, and it was only my father who came 2 years later, and they were not married at the time. After he came back, he organized a lot of trips, especially with students. And I have to say Alexandria University was always an extension of my family, our family. So we always went with all the students on many of these trips. So I went on this early trip to Abu Simbel. My father had this knack for wanting to see certain things in certain moments of time. So we knew that the high dam was going to be built. He said, I have to see the Abu Simbel before it's moved. And so we went in the early 60s. He took a group of students and traveled to Aswan and took a boat to Abu Simbel. And I was just 4 or 5 years old at the time. And I remember, this is my vague recollection, is lying on the big toe of Ramses' statue. And I was almost exactly the same size as the toe. Trips just were going on in the early 60s. Luxor, Aswan. We went to Siwa on a trip, and that was before there was a road. I did not go on the trip that is mentioned in these slides, that is in these pictures, but I did go on a trip in the early 70s, and the road was not there. You had to follow the telephone lines. And actually, we were 2 cars, and one of them, 3 of the tires broke, and we had a crisis. Somebody had to go back. It was not like what you're going to experience in a few days. But it was a lot of fun, frankly. Then in 1966, both my parents went to the Arab University of Beirut to teach, and so we moved to Lebanon. Lebanon is very different. There are mountains, there's snow. It was amazing. And also, critically, Lebanon is open to so many other countries. So we went to Syria, Jordan, Iraq, and then went west towards Turkey, spent a lot of time in Turkey at the time. We went to Greece, and again, I put this statue in Thermopylae because my father insisted on driving out to this middle of this plain out there just to see the site of the battle. And, we just went and then came back, and that was just part of what we lived, yeah. Came back in the 70s in Alexandria, and the trips continued. And here he did organize trips outside of Egypt. So one of his goals was to travel to all the countries that Alexander went to. And he took many of the students there. Unfortunately, I don't think he covered most of the countries. I ended up going to Iran and remembering him. So I tried to follow up in his steps, or in the steps that he didn't follow. And as was mentioned before by Ahmed Khalil, that we would go on these trips, and yes, it was an archaeological trip, it was a historical trip, but there were other aspects that were equally important. So for example, in Rome, we stayed at the Egyptian Academy there in Rome, and there was Sif Wanli, a famous artist, Egyptian contemporary artist, who was there, and we spent time with him and learned from him, the students, and we all interacted together. It was a cultural, historical, everything, archaeological event. We also went to Spain and many other places around the Mediterranean. What I'm going to try and do now is kind of to reflect a little bit on my father, my parents, and kind of my growing up. So when I was a kid, history was just part of everyday life. So my evening stories before going to bed for me and my sister were, one night it would be Odysseus, another night it would be Sindbad, a third night it would be Kalila wa Dimna. All of this is just mixed together and jumbled up in my mind in this beautiful narrative that just connects different cultures, different historical aspects of life and its influence on us. That was, I think, very important and kind of had a long-term effect on me, at least. Poetry was also a very important aspect of our life. So my mother's father, Abdul Halim Karara, was a poet. And I recall sitting evenings at their house, and my father and my grandfather sitting and going through the poems that my grandfather was writing, and would correct them or change them or reflect on what is in them. My grandfather translated the entire Faust, both parts, from German poetry to Arabic poetry. It's in straight verse, the entire collection. Even when I went to the States to study, my parents would still send me clippings. I went through some. You know, my mother would write Along the Gap by UNESCO. She would write the text of the entire thing in a letter and send it to me. I would get clippings of the latest poems by Nazar Qabbani that were taking place at the time. My grandfather's last poems, like he would write it on a scratch of, this was the back of an envelope that I had sent with a card in it. And then on the back of it, there's the miswadda, the draft of a new poem, which was later copied down and sent to me from his notes. So there was this entire interaction that was happening, and I think I miss it, and I think it's an era that has gone by, I am afraid. Letters are gone. I was amazed at the letters I was going through, thanks to Mona, the last 2 weeks. Another thing that was quite important for me growing up was my father used to make sure that every night, especially before exams, we have several exams here that were very important, Sanawiyya Amma, final high school, or even at the university. I was a computer scientist, math, physics, but we would every night go out for a walk on the Corniche here, and I would just tell him about what I'm talking about. And then eventually I realized, actually, sometimes he would tell me his stories or what he was thinking about. And I realized, yes, I'm a scientist, I'm a computer scientist, he's a humanist, he's a historian, but at heart we are both problem solvers. We identify a problem and try to solve it. So I'll just give you some examples from what I remember, and you are the historians who can understand it better, but there was the challenge for his PhD thesis about Alexandrian citizenship and whether there were two kinds of Alexandrian citizens or not. And there was a dominant theory. And he just was interested by this problem and decided, I'm going to solve it by going through manuscripts and reading different papyri that had different interpretations. And once you understood them, you ended up with what he decided, which was it was only one citizenship. And he used to tell me, when I said this to Hugo Jones, he would say, oh, wow, this is a revolutionary idea. This goes contrary to what Jones was advocating at the time. He was always fascinated by finances. So, and this problem especially was talked to me because there were all these Arab documents that were saying the budget of Egypt was 20 million, 2 million, 5 million, 50 million. There were 3 or 4 different numbers that were being thrown around. And my father said the problem was the metrics. And me as a scientist, I understand this. You can't just say 500. You have to say 500 dirham, dinar, what is it? And once you start understanding this, then you translate, and actually the numbers do make sense. Another period, he was working on the Nistana papyri, where he was interested in understanding how much taxation was being levied from Egypt. His knowledge of Greek as well as Arabic made him able to look at both the ancient documents, the Greek documents, and from the Roman period, and then to the Arabic, and understand what was happening and do a translation between these different numbers and taxation methods, and ended up helping understanding what taxation was. So it is finding something that's a little bit off and then trying to understand it. And this is what I do also. I enjoy that. Eventually, there was the question of the fate of the Library of Alexandria. So he took that on and tackled it and ended up writing a book about it and addressing what is the issue. Throughout all this, my father realizes that you need documents. You cannot have scholarship in a university without a library, without a strong foundation of knowledge. And unfortunately, at the time, in the 60s, 70s, there was very little of a library associated with the university. And that's where the idea that let's take on this ancient legacy of Alexandria and promote it. And then UNESCO is going to be interested, etc. This came up from early on in 1972. Nixon was visiting for the first time to Egypt after a long break, and this came up during that time. So it was quite early on. It took a lot of effort, like all good ideas. It takes time for theoretical ideas to take it into practice. I do things that I don't expect to see in computers today. I expect it to be in 10 years, 20 years maybe, even with computers. So imagine with a library, with books. My father received during his life many accolades. He was an honorary doctor. He was honored by the state. He was given the Nile Prize, which is one of the greatest prizes. And here is the president at the time, 2013, being given to him. But I think their legacy goes beyond these medals and just the everyday prizes. They had an impact on people who were visiting Alexandria, who were visiting Egypt. So this is just one, and I know several such examples. Anita Desai, who's a writer, she was visiting them, and then you read the book, Journey to Ithaca, and it reflects their apartment. It reflects my father. It reflects my mother. If any of you have been in their place, you will recognize there was a staircase. My mother going back and forth, this curved corridor. It's not a straight corridor, it's a curved, which is true what it was. It was in Mazarita. This is just around, this is where we are, literally. And I think my mother's lentil soup was famous, so she would offer it, and it is immortalized in a novel, and so on. And then there's obviously our cat, Cleo. So you read the book, and suddenly, wow, this is us. I come back to Roger Bagnall, who said, you know, people used to come to our house. It was open all the time, and I loved it. I mean, I grew up, there were people coming and going from all over the world, whether it's the US, Europe, India, Japan. It was really a cosmopolitan house and a cosmopolitan household. So I'll just end by saying I think my father lived a full life. He really enjoyed it. We enjoyed it. A lot of his students enjoyed it. A lot of his colleagues enjoyed it. I think it was a great time. And with all this, he achieved a lot also. So you achieved a lot, and you enjoyed it while you were doing it. And I really would be remiss if it wasn't just my father. It was my father and my mother. They were always together. And I like this last picture on the bottom, on your bottom right, where it was really, that's the image we had of them writing together, working together. It wasn't just my father, it wasn't just my mother, but it was really a collaborative effort. So thank you very much.
May I introduce to you all Mustapha Hiddaya, grandson of Mustapha al-Abadi, son of Muhga al-Abadi. I was very, very happy. Please rise up, rise up. Come on, come, Mustapha Jr., Mustapha Jr. They were very proud of you all the time. And I was very happy when he wrote to me all of a sudden and he said, well, I prepared myself and if you allow me to attend. You are most welcome, Mustapha.
It's not quite often that we come across someone so exceptional as Professor Abadi in different aspects. And what Amr said actually brought a lot of memories to me. I mean, things that I haven't remembered for quite a long time. My father was a colleague at the Faculty of Arts, and he knew Dr. Mustapha very well, and he was a linguist. So they had a lot in common between him and Professor Abadi. And also my dad worked with Dr. Azza in Beirut for several years, and also they had quite a lot of memories. And I often visited Dr. Mustapha at home, especially whenever he had problems with his laptop. So Dr. Azza would ask me to come and have a look at the laptop and try to figure out what the problems is. And I remember very well, one day at the faculty, I had my son with me, and he was 3. And as I was walking in the corridor, I met Dr. Mustapha, and he came and said hello to my son, and he said, Ana Mustafa, what's your name? So my son looked at him and said, Omar. So Dr. Abadi asked him, عندك كم سنة? How old are you? And he said, 3. What about you? So Dr. Mustapha looked at him and said, well, just like you. I mean, little things that really are quite amazing in his character. And again, his contribution to the creation of this place is something that we can never forget. He was the first flame behind the development and the creation of this project. His book and his research and his enthusiasm and his knowledge of the Alexandria Library was the thing that started this all. So, well, thank you, Dr. Abadi, for everything that you have done for us, and thank again, Amr, for being here. That ends the opening statements, and we will go right away to our first session. So I ask the speakers of the first session to come to the podium, please. We have 8 contributors to the first session. So please, Dr. Mona, Dr. Hussein, Kyriakos, Dr. Ibrahim, El-Kholi, Basma, and Minna, and Athanasios. Would you please come to the podium? Thank you very much for your kind attention. And Professor Dimitris Plansos will be heading this session. Thank you.